The killer was Michelle's new boyfriend, Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Kevin Foley. Based on evidence collected at the crime scene and tested by the FBI, this is a reconstruction of what authorities believe happened to John Jelinek in the early morning hours of April 13, 2006. Around 12:30 a.m., the killer drove their red car onto a quiet residential street in Blairsville. They eventually came to a stop in front of a modest brick home. There, they cut their lights. The killer climbed out and looked around the neighborhood to make sure no one was watching, but it was dark and silent. So, the killer left the street and walked around to the back of this home and then slipped inside of it through an unlocked back door. Once inside, the killer walked through the dining room and then into the living room where they found John Jelinek sleeping on the couch. The killer gripped a single-edged knife in their fist, and they walked right up to John, and they raised the blade up and then brought it down directly onto John. Instantly, John woke up and began screaming, and he put his hands up to try to protect himself, and he even tried clawing at the killer, getting the killer's skin under his fingernails. And so John eventually rolled off the couch, desperate to get away. John eventually got up and sort of began to stumble away, but the killer chased him down, and the two began to wrestle. And as they're struggling and the killer is stabbing John, John's flailing his arms around, and he eventually hit the divorce papers on the coffee table, throwing them everywhere. And then eventually, somehow, just on pure adrenaline, John broke away from the killer and tried to run for the front door. John eventually did make it to the front foyer, and he actually reached for the front door, but the killer actually shoved John as he did that, and John went flying towards that pane of glass to the side of the door, and his head went through the glass, and when his head went through, some of the glass severed his jugular, and then John bled to death right there. The killer watched until John was totally still. At that point, they walked back out of the home, tracking John's blood right back out the door. The killer was very confident they would never be caught, primarily because the killer knew people trusted them with their lives. The killer was Michelle's new boyfriend, Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Kevin Foley.